I need to go to the hairdresser. Hello guys, I'm Fabio and welcome to Let Me Teach You and to a new video about Germanic linguistics. As you could see, in the first 8 lessons we had a general overview of this science, from different points of view: geography, history, phonology, tonology, morphology, writing, and so on. Hello! But now it's time to go a little deeper into the details of each single field. So today we get back to the consonants, a topic that we have already discussed in video number 3. So, what are we waiting for? Let's start! In video number 3, we talked about a huge consonant change that occurred when Germanic emerged from Indo-European. We also said the name of this consonant change is first consonant shift. We didn't use the word change because sounds didn't just change. You have to imagine you have a sound chart. Each box corresponds to a specific sound, whereby each row refers to a specific place of articulation and each column includes boxes with similar manner of articulation, like voiced fricatives or voiceless plosives, and so on. If, in a certain moment of the history of one language, all sounds shift from a column to the next one, then the column they previously occupied remains empty, and then other sounds, coming from another column, moving like by osmosis, are attracted by the empty space and move into them. This is what linguists call a chain shift. So we talked about the first consonant shift, but we forgot to say...
Did we forget anything? You forgot, Fabio. You are the teacher.
Yeah, right. I forgot to say that there is another name for this phenomenon, that is Grimm's law, because the first person who was able to describe it in a scientific way was Jacob Grimm. Yeah, exactly. The father of Snow White and Hansel and Gretel. Some other people before had already noticed there were regular correspondences between Germanic and other Indo-European languages, but he was the first one who technically exposed this correspondence. So thanks to him we know that the transition from Indo-European to Germanic involved changing voiceless plosives to voiceless fricatives, voiced plosives to voiceless plosives, and aspirated voiced plosives to voiced fricatives or simple voiced plosives, depending on the context. Or at least this was the most supported theory. Yeah, never forget these are just reconstructions, which means these are theories that scholars may or may not support, in favor of other reconstructions which might be significantly different. But anyway, the theory we exposed is still today the most widely spread among linguists. But the first consonant shift doesn't always apply. Sometimes there are sounds or specific phonetic conditions in a word or a syllable which inhibit or modify the application of the first consonant shift. Let's give an example. Grimm's law fails to apply to an Indo-European voiceless stop preceded by s. We should expect the plosive to become a fricative, but no, in this case the sound just doesn't change. So for example we have Indo-European pisc, fish, which gave Latin piscis, but Germanic fiscus. As we know, the Germanic word is just a reconstruction, but we still find a very similar structure in Gothic fisks and Icelandic fiskur. As you can see, according to Grimm's law, the voiceless bilabial plosive is transformed into a voiceless bilabial fricative that eventually becomes labiodental f. But the second plosive k, which would be expected to become h or h, remains unchanged. Not always in linguistics we can explain phenomena using a strict logic, like when we talk about maths, but in this case we can. In fact, the sound s is a fricative sound, and a fricative sound, that is a sound whereby the air flows quite freely from the lungs through the mouth, already somehow satisfies that need, which is typical of Germanic, to release that accumulated air we talked about in video number 3. In simple words, if we have a simple sound p in Indo-European, In a first stage of Germanic, this sound was followed by a short puff of air, which was accumulated in the mouth, giving first p, which eventually evolved into h, and finally f. But if there is s before, this accumulation doesn't take place, because that air can already be released during the sound s. For this reason, Indo-European sp, st, and sk remain unchanged in Germanic. Take for instance Indo-European ghost, stranger, which gave hostis, enemy in Latin, and guest in English, or Gast, which means guest, in German. As you can see, we find the sound t in all languages. From an Indo-European root, spew, we have two words with same meaning and similar sounds in English spew and Latin spuo. This phenomenon doesn't only belong to the past. Still today, some Germanic languages like English and German usually release air after a voiceless plosive. So after a p sound, you will also hear a h sound, like in pain. This doesn't happen if a fricative sound precedes the plosive, like in Spain. And the fact that this law respects faithfully and natural human behavior can be confirmed by the presence of similar rules in other languages. Take, for example, Grassmann's law for Greek and Sanskrit. If you have a fricative sound in a root, this sound can be transformed into a plosive if followed by another fricative sound in the same word. Two fricative sounds often lead to dissimilation. One of the two fricatives must disappear. Something else happened. One day, a bearded and bald man called Carl Werner from Denmark realized that in some cases, voiceless plosives of Indo-European became voiced fricatives in Germanic, and not voiceless fricatives as it was expected. Indo-European pater becomes Germanic father, for example. He also noticed that sometimes in different forms of the same words, especially verbs, a voiceless and a voiced fricative alternate. This is, for example, typical of Germanic strong verbs, whereby you often have two different consonant sounds in the preterite depending on the number. For example, the Germanic verb werthan was warth in the first singular person of preterite, but wurdun at the third plural person. So he assumed the development into one or the other direction could be influenced by something. Not really something phonetical, rather something tonatical. Remember we said that the Indo-European accent was free, and it could move from one syllable to the other, for example from the root to the desinence, in the different forms of the same word. And we also said things changed in Germanic. In fact, the accent stabilized on the root syllable. Well, before this change took place, the so-called VeRnEr'S LaW was applied. Voiceless plosives pronounced before the accented vowel didn't become voiceless fricatives, but voiced fricatives. As the plural forms of the preterite were usually accented on the desinence, this law was applied on the root consonants of these verbs, but not in the singular person of the preterite or in the present, because by these forms the accent used to fall on the root. So we can say that the accent mobility, which was typical of Indo-European, disappeared completely in Germanic, however leaving traces like the ones we have just described. Ain't that amazing, guys? This change didn't only involve stop consonants, or plosives, which is the same thing, but also other sounds. For example, in the same circumstances, s became first z, then, in most Germanic languages, r, in a mechanism called rhotacism. This happened, for example, by the Indo-European root snooze, which was not stressed, leading to Germanic snoozo, and then to Old Norse snor, and Old English snoru. Today's Germanic languages almost completely cancel this consonant alternation in verb tenses in favor of another mechanism called analogy. This means that they took one of the two possible sounds and extended it to all forms to make it feel more regular. But still, traces are left. See the German verb ziehen, to draw, that originally included a voiceless fricative ch in the infinitive or in the present form, but a corresponding voiced sound r in the preterite. The voiceless sound then disappeared completely, even though we find a trace of it in that h, and the voiced sound survived, as it was transformed into a plosive g. So today Germans say wir ziehen in the present, but wir zogen in the preterite, or wir haben gezogen in the perfect, which includes the past participle gezogen. Once again, I want to show you how these mechanisms are somehow a natural development for the articulatory habits of the people speaking Germanic languages. In fact, the same law somehow applies still today in modern English. You say excellent, but exam. You say possible, but possess. In German as well, see nerven, but nervös. Hannover, but Hannoveraner. Okay guys, I'm glad to have enlightened your minds once again. If you want to stay enlightened, just follow the channel by clicking the buttons I always mention. Click on like, push the bell icon, sing a song, just do whatever you like. But don't forget to stay on this channel. That's it for the moment. See you and behave yourselves.